Be sure to follow Southpaws on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show, on Twitter at Southpaws Radio, on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com, and on YouTube by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. Episodes of Southpaws are available through Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and Reason.fm by doing a search for Southpaws. You can listen to Southpaws on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern, and you can listen to Southpaws on Pacifica Radio affiliates KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas.
For the hardest-hitting show in talk radio, the true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. My name is Darren Gibson. I'm your co-host.
And my name is Jack Prince, your fellow co-host.
And Jack, it looks like World War III might be starting, just to be frank about it.
Well, the impetus that Putin is showing indicates that he has his sights set farther than the boundaries of even Ukraine. And, you know, it's kind of like a guy that makes a mistake. You know, hell, once he's into it, why not go all the way, right? I mean, he's a pariah now internationally. And so Poland and, you know, these other surrounding countries, they're not sleeping sound either. But what a travesty, what a shock, and what a legacy for Donald J. Trump as his hero now has taken Europe back into war. The worst land and largest land invasion since 1939, they're saying. And you can put this right at the feet of the Orange Baboon. It's not hard to connect those dots.
Absolutely, and that's something that we will talk about on this show, because I do have a Washington Post story about Trump and his supporters that are just absolutely glowing about Putin. He's a genius. These people are traitors. I'm going to be very blunt today. Those people are nothing but traitors, and they should be locked up forever, or worse.
Exactly true.
Or worse, because guess what? In the Constitution, the only punishment for treason, I believe, is the death penalty.
Yeah.
And it's about time. Just like you've said, John Brown.
Zero tolerance, yeah.
Zero tolerance.
We're looking at the deaths of thousands of people because of the adjunct racism in this country. We're looking at the death of democracy, and that's not in any way hyperbolic. I think that the threat now really is a line between democracy and just full-blown aristocracy, dictatorship. And the dictator countries and leaders are lined up on one side. And we had this once before with Mussolini and Hitler, but we didn't have it in our own country. And today, that battle line between a dictatorial leadership and a democratic structure runs right through the middle of our country.
It certainly does. And I want to go ahead, Jack, and start out with this story by the Associated Press. This is written by Yuris Karmanow, Jim Heinz, Vladimir Isachenkov, and Dasha Litvinova. And again, this is out of Kiev, Ukraine. This is dated February 24th. Russia launched a wide-ranging attack on Ukraine on Thursday, hitting cities and bases with airstrikes or shelling as civilians piled into trains and cars to flee. Ukraine's government pleaded for help as it said Russian tanks and troops rolled across the border in a full-scale war that could rewrite the geopolitical order. Russian President Vladimir Putin ignored global condemnation and cascading new sanctions as he unleashed Moscow's most aggressive action since the 1979 invasion of Afghanistan and chillingly referred to his country's nuclear arsenal. He threatened any foreign country trying to interfere with, quote, consequences you have never seen, end of quote. Ukrainian officials said their forces were battling Russians on a series of fronts. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky tweeted this, quote, Russia has embarked on a path of evil, but Ukraine is defending itself and won't give up its freedom, end of quote. Later, he offered Russia an end to the hostilities, adding, quote, it wasn't Ukraine that chose the path of war, but Ukraine is offering to go back to the path of peace, end of quote. Zelensky, who earlier cut diplomatic ties with Moscow and declared martial law, described Russian forces advancing on multiple fronts, including a difficult situation developing in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, just over 20 kilometers away from the eastern border with Russia, and Russian troops slowly advancing from the north on the city of Chernobyl. He said a Russian airborne unit and an airport just outside Kiev, the capital, was being destroyed. He appealed to global leaders, saying, quote, if you don't help us now, if you fail to offer powerful assistance to Ukraine, tomorrow the war will knock on your door, end of quote. And you know what? He's right about that.
Yeah, he's hours away from being stretched on a rope, and he knows it.
Yeah. Zelensky said Russian forces were trying to seize the Chernobyl nuclear plant, site of the world's largest nuclear disaster, the world's worst nuclear disaster, I should say. By the way, they have now seized it. Large explosions were heard in the capital and in other cities, and people massed in train stations and took to roads as the government said the former Soviet Republic was seeing a long-anticipated invasion from the east, north, and south. The chief of the NATO alliance said the brutal act of war shattered peace in Europe, joining a chorus of world leaders who decried the attack, which could cause massive casualties, topple Ukraine's democratically elected government, and upend the post-Cold War security order. The conflict was already shaking global financial markets. Stocks plunged and oil prices soared amid concerns that heating bills and food prices would skyrocket. Condemnation rained down not only from the U.S. and Europe, but from South Korea, Australia, and beyond, and many governments readied new sanctions. Even friendly leaders like Hungary's Viktor Orban sought to distance themselves from Putin. Senior U.S. officials said the UN Security Council was expected to vote Friday on a resolution condemning Russia for the attack and demanding the immediate withdrawal of its forces. The vote will proceed even though the legally binding measure will almost certainly be vetoed by Russia, said the official, who wasn't authorized to discuss the matter publicly and spoke on the condition of anonymity. While some nervous Europeans speculated about a possible new world war, the U.S. and its NATO partners have so far shown no indication they would join in a war against Russia. They instead mobilized troops and equipment around Ukraine's western flank as Ukraine pleaded for defense assistance and help protecting its airspace. In Washington, President Joe Biden convened a meeting of the National Security Council on Ukraine as the U.S. prepares new sanctions. Biden administration officials have signaled that two of the measures they were considering most strongly include hitting Russia's biggest banks and slapping on new export controls meant to starve Russia's industries and military of U.S. semiconductors and other high-tech components. The attacks came first from the air. Later, Ukrainian authorities described ground invasions in multiple regions, and border guards released footage showing a line of Russian military vehicles crossing into Ukraine's government-held territory. European authorities declared the country's airspace an active conflict zone. In a worrying development, Zelensky said Russian forces were trying to seize the Chernobyl plant, which, again, they have since the writing of this AP article. And a Ukrainian official said Russian shelling hit a radioactive waste repository and an increase in radiation levels was reported. The official spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the sensitive matter. Other governments did not immediately corroborate or confirm the claims. The plant was the site of the world's worst nuclear accident when a nuclear reactor exploded in 1986, spewing a radioactive cloud across Europe. The plant lies about 80 miles north of the capital of Kiev. Yeah, this is scary stuff here. Why do they want Chernobyl? That's what I'd like to know.
That's a damn good question. Their overall strategy seems to be to decapitate the government and take over the seat of power. And to do that, they may have some peripheral steps, but it's worse than scary. When I say worse than scary, I mean it's certainly not just scary on that continent. This is worldwide now. We really are teetering on the overtaking of strongmen to rule this globe. This Zelensky, he pleaded this morning if there's not help, and we're not talking a mythical impact from a sanction. We're talking boots on the ground help.
Yes.
There's no reason why the NATO countries that are within striking distance of the Ukraine have made a move. And I'm wondering where all of this great technology the United States has in the form of missiles, is it the Javelin missile they've mentioned and so forth, where there's any impact from those. You have, within striking distance, obviously, of any missile, huge amassed forces of Russians that, really produce a tremendous target. I mean, you launch 100 missiles at the armament that's sitting still. They haven't got it all moved over the country. I don't see that type of output. So were they really equipped as adequately as we were told here in the West? I don't know. The West has done little to really stop this offensive. And the leader there, Zelensky, who's tried to maintain calm while pleading for help. There's people in this own city, Ukrainians, in tears, screaming. There's some interviewed on the television why there hasn't been a response from the West, because this is a first domino. We invaded Vietnam under the guise of a domino theory. This is a real domino theory, and this is Putin's first one. So it's frustrating, and it's scary for the import that is going to end up here, not just economically, but in the balance of governmental display. We're looking at the model that we know Trump is sexually excited over Putin, okay? That is his prototype. That is his hero. That he's got a cape on that Trump wishes he had on his shoulders. And he's got a dream of enacting that kind of rule here in this country.
Absolutely.
Protesters, thousands of protesters are arrested yesterday that had the temerity to go out and stand against this aggression and immediately thrown into jail. You may not see him again. That makes Trump's lips drip. He can't imagine a greater personal utopia than to have that kind of power.
You're talking about the protest in Moscow yesterday, correct?
Yes, exactly. Yep. And we already know it's state media where not a dissenting word can be spoken in Russia against this aggression. And that's what makes Trump jump with delight. This is horrific.
It is. We'll get into some more details on that in just a little bit here. Let me go ahead and continue with the AP article. After weeks of denying plans to invade, Putin launched the operation on a country the size of Texas that is increasingly tilted toward the democratic West and away from Moscow's sway. The autocratic leader made clear earlier this week that he sees no reason for Ukraine to exist, raising fears of possible broader conflict in the vast space that the Soviet Union once ruled. Putin denied plans to occupy Ukraine, but his ultimate goals remain hazy. Ukrainians who had long braced for the prospect of an assault were urged to shelter in place and not to panic. Yeah, well, I'm sure they're panicking now. As a matter of fact, I heard this morning on NBC News that Ukraine is now telling all men age 18 to 60 you cannot leave the country because they want them to fight. There were stories this morning of Ukrainians living overseas going back to Ukraine to pick up weapons and fight for the country.
One is that guy that was on Dancing with the Stars.
Yeah, one of the professional dancers on there.
Yeah.
Wow. Let me skip around a little bit on this article. With social media amplifying a torrent of military claims and counterclaims, it was difficult to determine exactly what was happening on the ground. Well, we know what was happening on the ground. And here's how we know. Associated Press reporters saw or confirmed explosions in the capital, in Mariupol on the Azov Sea, Kharkiv in the east, and beyond. AP confirmed video showing Russian military vehicles crossing into Ukrainian-held territory in the north from Belarus and from Russian-annexed Crimea in the south. Russian and Ukrainian authorities made competing claims about damage they had inflicted. Russia's defense ministry said it had destroyed scores of Ukrainian air bases, military facilities, and drones, and confirmed the loss of an Su-25 attack jet blaming it on pilot error. It said it was not targeting cities, but using precise weapons, and claimed that, quote, there is no threat to civilian population, end of quote. Well, we know that that's a lie. Ukraine's armed forces reported that at least 40 soldiers dead, said a military plane carrying 14 people crashed south of Kiev. Poland's military increased its readiness level, and Lithuania and Moldova moved toward doing the same. Border crossings increased from Ukraine to Poland, which has prepared centers for refugees. Putin justified his attacks in an overnight televised address, asserting that the attack was needed to protect civilians in eastern Ukraine. That is a false claim that the U.S. had predicted he would make as a pretext for an invasion. He accused the United States and its allies of ignoring Russia's demands to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO and for security guarantees. He called the military action a forced measure stemming from rising security risks for Russia. Which, let's just stop there. Now, Jack, we talked about it when we met up in a restaurant on Tuesday. That, yeah, Putin may have an argument about Ukraine joining NATO, but this is not how you handle this disagreement.
No, absolutely not.
Let me continue here. Anticipating international condemnation and countermeasures, Putin issued a stark warning to other countries not to meddle. In a reminder of Russia's nuclear power, he warned that, quote, no one should have any doubts that a direct attack in our country will lead to the destruction and horrible consequences for any potential aggressor, end of quote. Well, try it, buddy. Let's see what happens. Among Putin's pledges was to denazify Ukraine. Let me just add real quick. The neo-Nazis in Ukraine are supporting Russia, if I recall correctly. Am I right about that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's like the kid on the playground that tries to think of the worst word or moniker he can use, right? Mm-hmm. You know, instead of your big dumb skunk or something.
Your mom wears army boots, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. Let me continue. World War II looms large in Russia after the Soviet Union suffered more deaths than any country while fighting Adolf Hitler's forces. Kremlin propaganda paints members of Ukrainian right-wing groups as neo-Nazis, exploiting their admiration for World War II-era Ukrainian nationalist leaders who sided with the Nazis. Ukraine is now led by a Jewish president who lost relatives in the Holocaust and angrily dismissed the Russian claims. Putin's announcement...
Jewish Nazi, that's unusual.
Yeah. Well, it's just like Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that Nancy Pelosi is going to send the gazpacho police out.
Yeah, well, you know, that's people that are making sure that cooking standards remain high.
Yeah.
So
maybe Nancy Pelosi is the real soup Nazi. No soup for you, 1 year. I don't know. Putin's announcement came just hours after the Ukrainian president rejected Moscow's claims that his country poses a threat to Russia and made a passionate last-minute plea for peace. The attack began even as the UN Security Council was meeting to hold off an invasion. Members still unaware of Putin's announcement of the operation appealed to him to stand down. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres opened the emergency meeting, telling Putin, give peace a chance. Well, yeah, apparently Putin didn't listen to John Lennon either. But hours later, NATO's Jens Stoltenberg indicated it was too late, saying, quote, peace on our continent has been shattered, end of quote. Well, that's an understatement.
Well, it's not the same day. After decades, it's a different day in Europe, and there's leaders that realize it. The scariest thing, Darren, honestly, is that it is our leadership in this hemisphere that opened the door for this. And I don't have time in this show to go step by step how that was performed, but it has Trump on the top of the essay. And I think that the Fox News and the accolades that Tucker, without an F, is using to embrace this despot, the strongman, I think it's really going to drive a wedge in the party here. I think that the so-called moderates, this could be a straw that they can't swallow. They may not be able to not heed the call for unity here in the West to stand against this. It may not be a landslide, but there'll be some.
Yeah, let's get right into it. I have this story. This is Merrill Cornfield writing for the Washington Post. This is dated February 25th. As the United States seeks to rally its allies and impose tough penalties for Russia's aggression toward Ukraine, a vocal group of Republicans and right-leaning commentators is expressing praise and admiration for the president's strength and shrewdness. President Vladimir Putin, that is. While most congressional Republicans back Biden's tough line against Moscow or argue that it should be even tougher, a faction made up of conservative Republicans, supporters of Donald Trump, because we don't refer to him as the former president on this show, and conservative media figures says Putin should be left alone or even congratulated by Americans. On Tuesday, Trump complimented Putin, saying it was a smart move by the Russian president to send, quote, the strongest peace force I've ever seen, end of quote, to the Ukraine border. In a conservative talk radio interview from his Mar-a-Lago resort, Trump said, quote, this is genius. Putin declares a big portion of the Ukraine, Putin declares it as independent. Oh, that's wonderful. He used the word independent, and we're going to go out, and we're going to go in, and we're going to help keep peace. You've got to say that's pretty savvy, end of quote.
Incredible.
This is the 45th president of this country saying that about a sworn enemy.
Again, I think this is a bridge too far for a lot.
Treason.
In the party. There's got to be a few that fall out of the tree. But what's left will be more adamantly fascist than what we already have in the GOP. But the line, because of what's happening in Ukraine, in this country, has never been so defined. We're talking about the complete overthrow of democracy. They don't want that. They want dictatorial rule. They want the increase of power at any cost. They have no principles. They have no desire to uphold any structure, even from the alliances in NATO. We would have not been in this issue. If you realize the entire application for the NATO entrance by Ukraine was halted and thwarted by Donald J. Trump. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't be in this mess because even Putin wouldn't have messed with Ukraine knowing that the rest of Western Europe and the United States would come to their defense. This is strictly due, and you can thank Donald J. Trump that this is even happening. They would have been in the NATO alliance if it had not been for Trump.
I tell you what, can we just start referring to that orange bastard as Benedict Arnold Jr.?
You said treason. I can't think of a better example for it. And I look at a film of mothers with their kids huddling down in the train stations and the subway stations. You know, I was in Germany last summer, in Berlin, and saw the pictures of people as another strong man was attempting to impose his ideal. You see, you have to understand, in a room of 100 people are a species of people who believe that domination and insertion of a single person's rule is the way to have a government. Mm-hmm. It's like an eye color. And they really, truly can't understand the virtue of democracy, the virtue of justice. That's the way they want to rule their homes. That's the way they want to rule their governments. You know these people. They've never been given free reign.
Yeah.
They're breathing at our door to take over the rule of this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me continue this story. Again, this is the Washington Post. Trump is hardly the only figure making such arguments. Many on the right seem to have bought into Putin's claims that he is merely protecting his country and that it is the West that is showing aggression as NATO has moved closer to Russia's borders since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Conservative commentator Candace Owens tweeted this week, quote, I suggest every American who wants to know what's actually going on in Russia and Ukraine read this transcript of Putin's address. As I've said for a month, NATO, under direction from the United States, is violating previous agreements and expanding eastward. We are at fault. End of quote.
Yeah, wow. It's incredible. The whole history of World War II and the land grab. Do you realize if Putin continues on into Poland or any of those adjoining countries, even Hungary, The leader of Hungary, who has been in bed with Putin, has even distanced himself. But let's say that even if they step into Poland by a mile, we have the gloves off for World War III.
Yeah.
Because we are pledged that we will defend any square inch in NATO territory. And why wouldn't Putin continue? He's going to be in Kyiv in a day or two, they're saying.
Yeah.
The country's overthrown. He's got his armament sitting there idling. Why wouldn't he continue? And if he does, this is more than just a high price of gas coming at us.
Yeah, absolutely. Continuing the story again from Washington Post, Fox propaganda channel host Tucker Carlson, and that's what I'm going to refer him to for now on, like many others on the right, minimized Russia's move to invade and overpower a neighboring country as a border conflict that should not concern Americans. Tuesday, he said, quote, "It may be worth asking yourself, since it is getting pretty serious, what is this really all about? Why do I hate Putin so much? Has Putin ever called me a racist? Has he threatened to get me fired for disagreeing with him?" End of quote. Yeah. Tucker Carlson needs to be punched in the face. I'll say it right here. Send Fox Security after me, you asshole. Watch what happens. Let me continue. The comments reflect the novel phenomenon of a major political faction openly siding with the leader of a U.S. adversary against the American president. They cite Putin's shrewdness and strength along with an unfettered willingness to use force to expand his country's reach, suggesting that creates a flattering contrast with Biden, who they portray as weak and feckless. Once again, I'll repeat it, what I've said for the last year on this show. Evil, violent, conservative savages. They want power. They don't give a f*** about you. They only care about how much power and how much wealth they're going to accumulate. And if you're black, they really hate your guts. Candace Owens will find that out the hard way. Let me continue here. Yet Putin is an authoritarian leader who has jailed adversaries, shut down political opposition, and moved to eliminate a free press and independent judiciary. He has dispatched his powerful military against an independent neighboring country. When he was president, Trump sought to protect his strength in his own ways, regularly trying to exert his will over federal judges, Congress, media, and other institutions in ways that violated long-standing American norms, but were cheered by his supporters as a show of strength. Now some of his supporters see an admirable figure in Putin. That includes Mike Pompeo, who served as Secretary of State under Trump and recently called Putin, quote, savvy and very talented, end of quote. In a February 18th phone call with the Center for the National Interest, Pompeo said, quote, "I have enormous respect for him. I've been criticized for saying that," end of quote. Here's what he told Fox Propaganda Channel, quote, "He's a very talented statesman. He has lots of gifts. He was a KGB agent, for goodness sakes. He knows how to use power. We should respect that," end of quote. Once again, traitorous, evil, violent, conservative savages.
Trump
go ahead,
was
Jack.
in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And he saw the complete control that I don't know, what are they called, the robes? Are the kings? Is that it? Are the kings? I guess they are in Saudi Arabia. Beheading people that in any way protest or confront his policy. There was an erection under Trump's robes there behind the table. He could not imagine a greater utopia than to have that kind of autocratic power.
Yeah.
And now it's coming out. They can't contain themselves. They have to give Putin the accolades because that's who they are. They recognize that's how good it could be here in America. That's the portent. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the portent. What you see in Saudi Arabia, what you see in Russia, where you got a bunch of mafia cronies, really, that, if you go back historically, Putin was an average politician. He didn't have any money. He's one of the richest men in the world now. Mm-hmm. That's the coffers that are just waiting for the entire Trump family. with the kind of control that Trump wants to have. It's over the horizon. As I'm in my mid-70s almost, and I see my grandkids in elementary and one grandchild applying at Michigan, this isn't the same world. This is a moment, ladies and gentlemen, this is the listeners out there, you must realize, this is a moment that the way of life you think will continue, that we've had for 40, 50 years here, is going to end summarily, very quickly. If the Republicans gain control, you'll be seeing the attitude of a Putin sitting in Washington, and in the cabinet of Trump, you'd have the full display of autocratic power. And any form of democracy would never rise again.
Absolutely.
In the West. There'd be no more West.
No, there wouldn't.
The global, complete aristocracy run by the crooks and the billionaires.
Absolutely.
This show would be ripped out.
Yep.
We wouldn't have this show.
We'd be in jail, Jack. Let me just be blunt. We'd be in prison or we'd be dead. Stop worrying about the Kardashians. Stop worrying about who wins the NBA championship. We're talking about an end of civil life. Yes. Let me continue. Democrats and some Republicans denounced the suggestion that Putin was a non-threatening figure, let alone an admirable one. Liz Cheney tweeted, quote, "Former President Trump's adulation of Putin today, including calling him a genius, aids our enemies. Trump's interests don't seem to align with the interests of the United States of America," end of quote. The Wyoming Republican representative is a high-profile critic of Trump and his supporters. Some GOP strategists argued that praising Putin was not a wise move, especially if it involved denigrating the United States and its democratically elected president. Matt Makowiak, a Republican strategist in Texas, said, quote, "I think anyone who gives Putin credit is making a mistake. Putin is weakening Europe, attacking a sovereign country, which is to undermine the global position of the United States, which is to undermine the sitting president of the United States, has a vast nuclear arsenal, and is risking the First World War in 70 years, end of quote.
Yeah, pretty clear.
Makowiak said he believes that Trump and Pompeo are not assessing the moral implications of Putin's tactics with their comments, but rather his single-minded pursuit of his goal. But glowing language about Putin goes too far, Makowiak said. Some polling suggests that Republicans view Putin positively compared with their view of Democratic leaders. But Makowiak said that based on his conversations with GOP voters, many of them simply do not consider Ukraine a priority, and that Democrats and Republicans are wary of overseas entanglements after years of wartime abroad. Still, he added this, quote, "Non-interventionism can be nice in theory until the practical realities of the world oftentimes come to your doorstep," end of quote. And you know what? This will be the first time in ages I've agreed with a conservative. You can't be pacifistic about it. Look at the history lessons. World War II. Right there should be the biggest one.
Well, I hear from the left, how the United States is striven, for decades to promote hegemony over the entire world, etc. And you know what? There's merit there. But we're talking right now about a need to unify. To unify, I'm calling on the Republicans like Meyer right here in this town to say they support the actions of the West to stymie this onslaught, and you've dropped the partisan politics. They've been crucifying Biden, blaming Biden for this war, and there needs to be a stop. I've heard how unified the world was, the United States after 9/11. There has to be, in this moment, this aggression has to be stopped. NATO has to get together. I would be for a declaration that there'd be interference or intervention if there is assassination or if there is incarceration of the democratically elected government in Ukraine.
Yeah.
If you don't put a goal line somewhere, some type of boundary, he's just going to continue to climb.
Absolutely. Let me continue here. Conservatives' arguments against the United States aiding Ukraine vary. J.D. Vance, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, who is now running a hard-right campaign for U.S. Senator in Ohio, acknowledged that Putin is hardly a praiseworthy figure, but argued that Ukraine still does not merit U.S. support. In an earlier statement, Vance said, quote, Vladimir Putin is an evil man who has done a number of evil things during his time in government. But spare me the performative affection for the Ukraine, a corrupt nation run by oligarchs that is as close to a functional democracy in 2022 as Afghanistan was when Joe Biden handed it over to the Taliban in 2021. End of quote. I'm going to stop right there because since that statement came out, everybody has pounced on J.D. Vance. Democrats, fellow Republicans, a lot of fellow Republicans. So Mr. Vance had to issue a second statement, and I'm going to read it in its entirety here. So this is not the Washington Post story. This is a statement issued by J.D. Vance on Russian invasion of Ukraine out of Cincinnati. He released this statement, and I'm going to read it verbatim. Quote, Russia's assault on Ukraine is unquestionably a tragedy, especially for the innocent people caught in the crossfire. It's also a stark reminder of our own failed leadership. For decades, elites pursued a policy of isolating Russia, which has only had the effect of driving Putin directly into the arms of the Chinese communists. We wouldn't be watching the tragedy we're witnessing today if Russia didn't have Beijing's backing. We spent $6 billion on a failed Ukrainian army. Our leaders foolishly pressured Ukraine to give up their nuclear arsenal in the 1990s, which stripped them of their leverage to deter an eventual Russian invasion. These supposed experts wrongly predicted that these moves would deter Russia instead of provoking them. On this, as with so much else, they were catastrophically wrong. Trump deserves an incredible amount of credit for the strength and diplomatic engagement that kept Putin in check, and Biden an equal amount of blame for his lack of leadership. Our energy independence gave us leverage. Biden squandered it. While media elites slander those of us who believe in America first, Russia is always at its most bellicose when a globalist sits in the Oval Office. In the coming days, the usual suspects will show no humility. Russia has earned sanctions, but whatever sanctions we apply will have little effect. So the experts will demand we do something without spelling out what it even means. Sadly, all the other Republican candidates in the Ohio Senate race have echoed those calls. They should try being honest with the American people and admit what they really want: military intervention from American or NATO troops. This would be a disaster, and we must stand against it under any circumstance. Putin is an evil man, but the foreign policy establishment that led Ukraine directly into the slaughterhouse deserves nothing but scorn. Finally, we must remember that the only real solution to tyranny abroad is a strong America, with protected borders, a prosperous middle class, and healthy people. Because further engulfing ourselves in Eastern Europe harms and distracts from those goals. We must avoid blundering our way into the conflict there. Meanwhile, Congress must demand a debate on any further deployment of resources to that region. End of quote. No, JD, the only solution to tyranny is to execute the tyrannist. Period. End of story.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can't run from this. You can't kick this can down the road. Let's go back to his verbatim, what you said, what you read, that any interference, any intervention by NATO forces or American forces is totally taboo. And he said that would be a disaster, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, it would be a
10 seconds
disaster.
ago. The truth is, and I'm going to turn that on its head, if there is no intervention by NATO and from the West, that will be the disaster. Let's stop and think. Does Putin really want to have a world war with the United States? Is that not the card he's holding in his hand? He knows we don't want a world war with Russia. Is he really going to launch nuclear missiles into Western Europe?
He might. He's nuts. I'm sorry, he's like Trump. They're both cuckoo.
Well, you got your pick. You can take that chance, call his bluff, and stand up to him, right?
Yep.
Or you can just wait until he slowly continues taking advantage of appeasement because he knows that he can handle the NATO forces in any nation. Germany, Poland, doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
He knows that. He's going to be buoyed after the success he has in Ukraine. So you got two roads. You either stand up right now and draw a line and say, yeah, we'll go to the mats. We'll go all the way with you, motherfucker. We're not going to let you take over Europe. And I would move that even a step farther. We'll intervene if you try and take over the government of Ukraine, which undoubtedly that's what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. He has relished on us standing down and letting this happen. And that's just wind under his wings.
It certainly is. Let me continue the story here. Others have adopted the mantra that Biden is showing more concern for Ukraine's border than for America's, a way to twin their criticism of Biden's foreign policy with what they see.
I can barely listen to that crap. Keep going.
With what they see as an overly lax policy toward would-be immigrants. Vance was among those who pointed to the illegal import of fentanyl across the southern border as an issue more deserving of attention than the international conflict. I think that was what caused him to issue this second statement that I just read. Representative Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, or QQ of Arizona, tweeted last week, quote, "We should just call ourselves Ukraine and then maybe we can get NATO to engage and protect our border," end of quote. Gosar had previously tweeted, quote, "Putin puts Russia first as he should. Biden should put America first, but instead he will let in terrorists and welfare seekers," end of quote.
Yeah, that's our downfall. Welfare seekers.
Yeah. No, Gosar, you son of a bitch, you're an asshole. I tell you what, if that son of a bitch ever gets reelected, I can't say what I want to say because I'll get the Secret Service on my ass. F*** him.
They've strained us. They've strained us with the absolute fury as this is getting to this critical world stage. The Gosars and the Smiths and the what was the guy down in Florida the other day took his jabs at Trump. They're bringing us to the edge.
Yeah,
they're bringing us to the edge. I talked with a friend 2 or 3 days ago, and he says it's going to turn down to killing in this country.
Yeah,
it's somebody that's sick, and you want to hold it down, you want to contain it, you don't want to throw up, but it's got to come out, and people are realizing it. Putin has brought us to this moment, and I don't think people still really appreciate what's at stake.
No, they don't. Let me finish off this story here. That rhetoric is unfolding as most Republicans in Washington are making a somewhat opposite argument, criticizing Biden for not taking stronger action against Russia, for example, by imposing hard-hitting sanctions earlier. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican Kentucky, said Tuesday that the United States and its allies must issue devastating sanctions against Russia and the Kremlin. He said, quote, "As he escalates his war against Ukraine, Putin must be made to pay a far heavier price than he paid for his previous invasions of Georgia and Ukraine," end of quote. Which we should remind everybody, this isn't the first time that Putin has invaded Ukraine.
Well, 2014.
Yep, absolutely. And I want to read this to you, Jack. A very dear friend of mine posted this on her Facebook, and I ended up sharing this. This was originally posted by Keontae McDonald. Says, "The Ukraine and Russia crisis in simple terms for those that have no idea what's going on. Ukraine used to be in an abusive relationship with Russia, feeding him, letting him use her car, and giving him whatever he asked for until she built up the confidence to call it quits back in 1991. Since then, Ukraine has been working on herself, becoming a strong, independent woman with help from friends like France, America, Poland, etc., offering her support, loaning her money, and helping her find her way. Ukraine has been enjoying being single for 30 years and looking forward to continuing to grow and create new friendships. Now Russia, being the toxic ex that it is, wants her back and doesn't want her meeting new people or creating any new relationships. A couple of weeks ago, Russia started sitting in front of Ukraine's house, and when her friends asked him what he was doing there, he said, "Oh, nothing, just getting a little bit of exercise in, that's all." After her friends told her that Russia was potentially getting ready to do something bad to her, he said, They're lying. They just want you to be scared of me, and that's not what it is. Yesterday, Russia broke into Ukraine's house, beating her up and taking advantage of her while on live stream and double dog daring any of her friends to do something about it. And if they do want the smoke, Russia's got that thing on them. That's pretty well summed up right there. And it's an abusive relationship. It really is.
And we're sending messages to the abusive boyfriend. We're going to raise the price of his rent by 20%. So hands off.
Yeah. Unbelievable. This is just insanity. Can we go to something just a little, it's not even lighter. Let's move on from this because we actually have to get to our next segment here. So we might as well just go ahead and play the appropriate music.
Stop. Hammer time.
Oh yeah, it's hammer time. It's time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. And we've got 2 of them for you this week. So whenever we have 2 douchebags, we got to play Sam Elliott.
Double douche.
Who is that guy?
Gentlemen,
Wade Garrett.
holy shit. Exactly right.
Yes, both of them have something in common this week. Transphobia and homophobia. Winner number 1 is Texas Governor Greg Abbott, Republican, or QQ. This is Joe Yerkaba writing for NBC News. This is dated February 23rd. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is calling on licensed professionals and members of the general public to report the parents of transgender minors to state authorities if it appears the minors are receiving gender-affirming medical care. The directive was part of a letter Abbott, a Republican, no, he's a QAnon, sent Tuesday to the Department of Family and Protective Services, calling on it to, quote, conduct a prompt and thorough investigation, end of quote, of any reported instances of minors undergoing, quote, elective procedures for gender transitioning, end of quote. Abbott's letter follows an opinion released Monday by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who, by the way, has his own legal problems he needs to worry about, which stated that allowing minors to receive transition care such as puberty blockers, hormone therapy, and surgery is child abuse under state law. So, honorable mention to Ken Paxton, too. Paxton issued the opinion after the legislature failed last year to pass a bill that would have made it a felony alongside physical and sexual abuse to provide such care to minors. So, wait a minute here. The Republicans, the Republicans, the QQs, are trying to equate transition care to sexual abuse? To physical abuse? What f***ing kind of world are they living in?
Forget the emotional abuse that you hold a woman or a man in the wrong gender in a prison cell of emotion. That means nothing to them. Now, real child abuse, they don't even recognize that. But again, this is right down Putin's playbook. This is the kind of crap that they like. And Saudi Arabia and countries where they kill people for being gay.
Exactly.
That's where they're headed.
Exactly.
In Texas, yeah.
Let me continue this. An opinion is an interpretation of existing law. It does not change the law itself, but can affect how it is enforced. In Tuesday's letter, Abbott tasked licensed professionals who work with children, including teachers, nurses, and doctors, and members of the general public with reporting such claims. He added that state law, quote, provides criminal penalties for failure to report such child abuse, end of quote. So now he's threatening all these professionals. You know what I do? I just leave the state of Texas.
Oh, yeah.
As Jim Gerner used to say when he was part of this show, we ought to just give Texas back to Mexico. But then again, why would we want to punish Mexico? You know?
That'd be cruel.
Yeah, it would. Advocates allege that both Paxton's opinion and Abbott's letter are politically motivated, noting that they were released just ahead of the March 1st Republican primary and that both men face a crowded field of contenders in their re-election bids. Audrey Perez, policy and advocacy strategist for LGBTQ equality at the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas, said Paxton is trying to distract from the problems plaguing his campaign. He is awaiting trial for a 2015 indictment on charges of securities fraud and he is under investigation by the FBI over allegations of bribery and abuse of office. Paxton's office did not return a request for comment. Perez said, quote, "There's no court in Texas or the entire country that has ever found that gender-affirming care can constitute child abuse." End of quote.
No.
Brian Klosterbor, a staff attorney at the ACLU of Texas, said in a statement that neither the opinion nor the letter have a legal effect and, quote, "cannot change Texas law nor usurp the constitutional rights of Texas families. But they spread fear and misinformation and could spur false reporting of child abuse at a time when DFPS is already facing a crisis in our state's foster care system. The law is clear that parents, guardians, and doctors can provide transgender youth with treatment in accordance with prevailing standards of care. Any parent or guardian who loves and supports their child and is taking them to a licensed healthcare provider is not engaging in child abuse." End of quote. It's unclear whether Abbott and Paxton can force the Department of Family and Protective Services and other state agencies to investigate claims of child abuse against the parents of trans kids without passing legislation that changes the law. At least one county-level official has said that he will not enforce Abbott's directive. Christian Menifee, the elected attorney who represents Department of Family and Protective Services in civil child abuse cases in Harris County, where Houston is, said in a statement that Paxton and Abbott, quote, "are ignoring medical professionals and intentionally misrepresenting the law to the detriment of transgender children and their families. My office will not participate in these bad faith political games. As the lawyers handling these cases, we owe a duty of candor to the courts about what the law really says. We will continue to follow the laws on the books, not General Paxton's politically motivated and legally incorrect opinion." End of quote.
Yeah, the Lone Star State. Now you can spy on your neighbor if you can see if they're seeking an abortion, or even suspecting that they are. You can cash in. What is it? $10,000 reward.
Yeah.
And also keep your eye out peeled. You can start a lawsuit against any professional that's trying to transition sexual gender. It's Geneva. That's the Calvinistic nightmare that he built in little town of Geneva, Switzerland, where his moral code against the gays and against the illicit sexual positions becomes the responsibility to monitor by the citizens.
Yeah.
That's where you're at in Texas.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me mention this real quick. Over the last year, nearly 24 states considered legislation that would bar access to some or all gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors. Some states, including Texas, considered bills that would have charged parents or doctors who provide transition care with a felony. Only 2 states, Arkansas and Tennessee, have enacted restrictions on such care for minors, and a federal judge blocked Arkansas law from taking effect in July. The White House, which has recently stepped up its response to anti-LGBTQ state measures, spoke out against Abbott's directive Wednesday in a statement to the Dallas Morning News, and we'll skip that. To go to winner number 2 of Hammer Time this week, Florida Senator Rick Scott, Republican, QQ, whatever. This is Matt Lavietta's writing for NBC News. Senator Rick Scott laid out a conservative blueprint this week for a GOP takeover of Congress, and included in his 11-point plan to rescue America are a number of proposals that would limit the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. The document outlines Republican policy objectives on everything from the economy to abortion, but the point that caused the most alarm to LGBTQ advocates was in a section titled Gender, Life, Science. Scott, yeah, like Republicans give a damn about science. Yeah. Scott wrote, quote, "Men and women are biologically different, male and female. He created them. Facts are facts. The earth is round. The sun is hot. There are 2 genders, and abortion stops a beating heart. To say otherwise is to deny science." End of quote. Do you hear this, asshole?
I know.
Unbelievable.
The shape of the earth is dogmatic and absolute, right? And the temperature of the human body, 98.6. It's not absolute. It is not in any way tangible that there's a God. So when they mix the two, that's a pretty obvious attempt.
Yeah. In this section, Scott, who served as Florida's governor from 2011 to 2019, called for nationwide bans on government forums that include questions about gender identity or sexual preference, gender-affirming procedures on minors, and transgender women and girls participating on female sports teams. The policy states, quote, "We will protect women's sports by banning biological males from competing. It is hugely unfair and would erase many of the gains women have made in athletics over the last 50 years." End of quote.
That's dark ages. I tell you. And it's right at the door.
So far in 2022, conservative state lawmakers have filed more than 170 anti-LGBTQ bills, already surpassing last year's total of 139. That's according to Freedom for All Americans. The majority of the bills target transgender minors' ability to receive gender-affirming health care or participate in sports.
Yeah. This is a portent of the future.
It is.
Can you imagine if you let these redneck, toothless idiots free out of the box legislatively, if you put them in power again, where we're going to go?
Yeah.
Chilling.
It is. It's very chilling. So to Governor Greg Abbott and to Senator Rick Scott, we've got this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag.
Yeah, that's right. Why is it the Republicans can't help it? Why can't they help themselves? They're all douchebags.
They can't see. They're like blind. They bump into every idiotic obstacle. You can imagine how egregious these two are to us, ladies and gentlemen. When we hold Lee Chatfield, who had sex with his brother's girlfriend in high school, who would normally be right at the top of the list for douchebag, right?
Yeah.
He's not even on the chart compared to these people. To these leaders.
And we apologize because of what happened in Ukraine. We promised last week we were going to talk about Lee Chatfield this week, but unfortunately current events prevailed, and so
absolutely the priorities have greatly shifted.
Absolutely.
No apology needed, but nonetheless, we'll get to them.
Yeah, if we got time next week, we will get to them. And right now, we are out of time for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson.
I'm Jack Prince.
Please support independent media and the First Amendment.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.